German side, I think Carl will be leading your conversations. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you, Anne-Carol. So for our first speaker, I'd like to give the stage to Rafael Thiessen from Brownfields 24. Rafael Thiessen is the manager of the Brownfields 24 platform, which he will introduce us more to during his short input. He has extensive knowledge in the field of real estate development. And with that short introduction, I would like to give the word over, please.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Rafael, and I will talk today not as the managing director of Brownfield 24. I will speak as managing director of the German Brownfields Association. Just briefly, what is Brownfield 24? Brownfield 24 is a platform open to everybody where you can just put your brownfields if you would like to sell them. And on the other hand, we have a community of companies who have the ability to redevelop them and bring them into the life circle again. Why am I talking about as a person of the Brownfield Association? The reason is we have founded the association just a year ago, and we have already 115 active members. The majority obviously out of the private sector, but we also have members from the public sector. Why we do have it? Because we have in Germany the goal to reduce the, let's say, the reduction of using a new surface down to 0 hectare in 2015. And our belief was that in the political discussion, it does not have currently, let's say, the stage that it needs to reach this goal. And we have a huge, I do not know how it is in the US, but especially in Germany, we have a huge discussion saying that we do not have sufficient space anymore, that we do need more green fields. And when I'm invited as a speaker, I always say that's bullshit. We have sufficient space. The problem is, or the issue is that now there are coming the fields on the, let's say, on the plate, which are more, how do you say in English, herausfordernd, which have more
challenges, I would say.
More challenges, exactly. And that is why we're now coming to the GIS tool, which I'm going to present. We have a discussion, or in Germany, we do not know where brownfields are exactly located. One or the other of you will know that in the UK there is a system which is available for everybody. You just go in the GIS and you can see, okay, there's a brownfield. You know the obstacles. You do not know the owner, but you can see like, okay, there's a brownfield which might be developed. In Germany, we do not have. In Germany, it is like in the communities, or each community have their own system. One is better than the other, but even if you're just changing cities in between 15 or 20 kilometers, it can be that they have different approaches. Hence, our aim as a Brownfield Association was like, okay, let's do something. If there is no way for us to convince the political stakeholders to establish a Brownfield cadastre from their side, let's do it from the association side, and that is what I'm now going to present you. Although the slides are in German, doesn't matter. I will translate, and you will see. What happens now? You should see my slides, I guess. So this was just a month ago when we held our yearly meeting of the association in Essen. And in October last year, we have started a crowdfunding within the members of the German Brownfield Association, because we wanted to check if there is a possibility to establish a brownfield cadastre in Germany with the help of artificial intelligence. So why have we said artificial intelligence? Because you start at a point where you do not need to ask anybody from the public sector. And that makes it sometimes much more easier rather than going to every community and say like, hey, tell me what kind of brownfields you have. And so we, as an association, do not have the ability to do so. We asked some professionals who should do it. Before we did so, these are the guys who are in the association group dealing with the brownfield cadastre. So we have them from different professional types. To say like, okay, what does this system needs? What is a brownfield? So we defined previously how the system should look like. What should a brownfield be look like, and then to train the artificial intelligence. And as you can see here, Fraunhofer, I do not know if the Fraunhofer Institute is well known in the US, but it is like in Germany, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is like a semi public and semi private company. So they have the ability to grab, let's say, public information which a normal company normally can't do or needs to pay a lot of money. So we talked to the Fraunhofer Institute and another company which is called Space Statists, because they have done something similar for the city of Düsseldorf, for the city authority of Düsseldorf. And the goal was, can you prove, if it is possible, that artificial intelligence is able to identify brownfields in Germany automatically? So that was the goal. And just to make it short, yes, it is possible. And now I'm just going to present how it is somehow working. It is not done. So yesterday evening we saw the first results. We have finalized, or they have finalized now North Rhine-Westphalia with around 52,000 hits. And now we are just reproving, is it really a brownfield, yes or no? But how is the methodology going? Because this is something new which we have done in Germany. First of all, a brownfield for us, as well as you, is normally something or a pre-used industrial site. That was very important for us. So we're not looking for any housing areas or whatever. So we said like, okay, let us just check all GE, so industrial sites in Germany. So we took the cadastre data where we know already from the official data this is industrial, and then it is not me who trained, it is the Fraunhofer. So I always need to say like the Fraunhofer guys and Space Statists. They trained the artificial intelligence saying like, okay, this is how we define a brownfield. And now you need to distinguish between an area that is industrial as well, but it is still in use. So this is something you need to kick out. And this one you need to see, to reckon, and to throw it out. And that was somehow a challenge. Nevertheless, in Germany, we have identified around about 660 hectares of industrial areas. But no, this is not all brownfield. This is just the industrial area. And then in a second step, we need to identify like if it is a brownfield or not. So the system itself, as I said, not 100% now ready, but the results of what we have detected is already pretty good, so that even the guys from the Fraunhofer said like they haven't expected that it is as good as predicted. How should the system at the end looks like? Because currently it is the artificial intelligence, or we are at the current point that the artificial intelligence is kicking you out pictures, but this is not something you can work with. So the second phase, which we are now aiming on, is to bring these, let's say, these pictures into a GIS system, which is possible. But we're currently looking for the funding, and we need to just need to transform these pictures into a GIS system. But nevertheless, how should it then look like? There are like two options: either working with dots, which would be the easiest. We are also trying to use 3 words. So because like brownfields or sometimes have we do not have an address, so we try to do it with what 3 words, so we can add like to a brownfield exactly this code. But the good thing would be the artificial intelligence can tell you with a probability from 0 that it is an industrial area, but it is still in use. So then it is highlighted in white. And if the artificial intelligence says you there is less or there is less traffic, or it's from former satellite pictures, there is less traffic, it tells you there is a high probability that this might be a brownfield or an unused area. So this would be then the aim, that at the end you go to a GIS, you zoom in, zoom out, and you can see like from the grid structure, if you have more red points, and then there is a high probability of a brownfield. If it is white, then you can say, okay, it is still in use. I do not have to look at it. Yeah. This is, for example, that was a month ago when we just said, okay, this is a snapshot of just a small area in Germany, east of the Ruhr area, where just the artificial intelligence has, let's say, identified 15,000 dots, but these 15,000 dots have to then break down if it is really a brownfield or not. So this is currently where they are still working on, but somehow the results nevertheless were still impressive. So where we are right now, because like the system is not ready yet. So this was like the proof of concept, which we have finalized a month ago, or even just yesterday evening, where we said, okay, yes, it is possible. Then the next step is to get the funding done for the to transform these pictures into a GIS system. This costs money, and now we're in the funding. But then we would have a system that can be used by, let's say, normal people. And what we still have to clarify, like how should it be used at the end? As an association, our intention was to have a system that can be used also by the communities, because if the communities use this system, then it makes sense, because they can say, if an investor is coming and say, hey, I have a greenfield I would like to develop, then the community can say like, okay, why should we use a greenfield? Look here, we have several brownfields. Why don't you first take a look at them and try to reuse them? And the second point is we would have a general overview saying like, or a proof that there is sufficient space. There are sufficient brownfields that can be reused. So there is, the discussion is obsolete in being like, there is no sufficient space anymore. But from my talks over the last weeks with politicians, I have to say like, the question towards me is always, why don't you do it as private company and monetize it? And which from my perspective is somehow sad, because I honestly was expecting that the politicians would say like, awesome system, here have you some money, get it done, and we will implement it for all communities, which is currently, from my perspective, sadly, this is not the case. So they are all just pushing us and saying like, do it privately, have fun. and try to get people who are then paying to get these brownfields and develop them. And last but not least, this is, let's say, the overall structure, how it could be, because as I mentioned before, Space Cities has done it for Düsseldorf in a case study for the city authorities. And the good thing is that if you not only have the brownfields, you can also add socio-demographic data, which is already available. You just put a layer on. But currently the bottleneck which we want to close is like, show us the brownfields, show us where they are, and show us the potential of the fields. And yeah, that's my discussion. And I hope I'm in time.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that very interesting input. I would like to open the floor also to our guest for questions, but I myself have one. Looking at the presentation, it seems like the strength is that it creates a database or a basis, I should say, of information, which is not existing currently in German municipalities. And perhaps one of the weakness, maybe it's more related to the German system, is that there's a lack of responsibility of actually carrying this task out in the practice. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, because like when I'm talking to politicians, they're just going already much too deep into the discussion. And as you said, what we would like to create is just the basis. So the basis to see like, okay, where are the brownfields? Where is the space that can be developed? We're not going to answer if the field is available or not, but we are, let's say, creating a brownfield cadastre where everybody should or could see there's a potential site or a site that has potential to be developed. And then to finish the discussion that there is not sufficient space. That is the question that we would like to answer with this brownfield cadastre.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that confirmation. I'll look quickly to the audience if there's any questions. I believe Nova, you have raised your hand.
Thank you, Rafael. I'm wondering if you could tell us, in your experience, who has been most interested in this work? You mentioned the politicians kind of pushed back and asked you to work with private sector, but to date in your presentations, who's been most excited about this work?
Investors. Yeah, it's a very simple and honest answer. The investors. Why? Because like I do not know about the US market, but there is a lot of cheap money in the market, and people would like to invest, and they would like to build, and or for housing, or in Germany we have a huge logistic boom at the moment. And they need space, and the cities or the communities say there is no space, but the investor said, yeah, but we need to develop because there is demand for it, and hence they're looking where is space available, and then they found a brownfield, and they say, okay, I look at the brownfield and I see like at the building law, and the building law says I can use it. Why shouldn't I develop it? And in the former years, there was no need for developing brownfields. But now with the discussion, with the political discussion to reduce the usage of greenfields, investors see like, oh, that's great. And that's also great for the, let's say, sustainable framework, which is now coming up. Because like also investors looking at like, okay, where have you built your house? You say like the housing is sustainable, but what about the soil where you have built it on? Is this also reused, or is it a green field? And so also the investors are now triggered from their investment side to build not only a sustainable building, but also on a sustainable soil. And so the investors have a huge interest in getting an overview where is space where they can put their money on.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. I see Robert Hecht has raised his hand, and then I'll get to you, Anne.
Yes, I'm interested in the features or data that has been used for training the deep neural network. Is it just the images, or is it additional data like social media or?
No, this is, The Fraunhofer, they have access, let's say, to very new, let's say, satellite pictures. They're just screening satellite pictures, nothing else. So it's like Google Earth, but the data which is used is newer than the one on Google Earth. And then the artificial intelligence is just trained to overfly and then to identify brownfield or not brownfield. So no Facebook, no whatever source.
So the data, the satellite imagery is not for free. So Fraunhofer needs to be within the.
They have that is the advantage, because they are somehow more half public. So they have access to data which you as a normal company either don't have or is extremely expensive.
Yeah.
Okay, and Carol, please.
Yes, this is really interesting, and I put something in the chat. There's this website called Cleanups in My Community that shows where past EPA-funded brownfields are. But of course, like you, we don't have a complete inventory for the country. So I wondered, given you're using satellite data, are you doing any thermal imaging? Because that might actually speak to the sustainability piece of your mission. And if you actually were able to get heat maps, that might, get the sustainability conversation front and center.
You need to repeat that because I didn't get that point. Sorry.
I'm sorry. So like, as you're doing a satellite picture, are you also getting a heat picture so that you would see where the temperature is going to be higher and therefore additional solar or, greening might be needed?
That would be the cherry on top. But that is, just to come back, we want to first give the basis. So that we have a discussion basis, which we in Germany don't have. The rest, from my perspective, is just putting one layer to the other into the system, because there are layers and you just need to click them on and off. But the basis is missing. So everybody's talking no space, nothing. You have about, let's say you have heating maps, but nobody knows then where is the brownfield? Nobody can answer you this question. And we're just putting in the basis, nothing else. Or at this stage.
So we'll talk later when we're on the dessert stage.
Yeah, when the cherry comes up.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that interesting discussion. Before we get to dessert, I would like to go over to our second presenter for today, Mr. Robert Hecht. Mr. Robert Hecht is from the Leibniz Institute for Ecological, Urban and Regional Development, otherwise known in German as the EOR, and he is active in the fields of geoinformatics, GIS science, and cartography, as well as remote sensing. And today he will share us with some of his experience in the field. And Robert, we look forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
My microphone was switched off. So
Perfect.
You can see everything. Yeah. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Rafael, for the introduction, because I can now directly move into the topic, because the setting is basically the same. I'm from the Leibniz Institute of Ecological Regional Development, and in the group where I'm in, that's the Department of Spatial Information and Modeling, we are dealing with data-intensive and data-integrating approaches for analyzing and assessing settlement and open space structures in their dynamics and at different scales. And one major topic is land use and its land change, and especially the challenge of land take in Germany. Over the last 16 years, the amount of land used by human settlements and transport has been more than doubled. And there are different policy goals that has been defined on national and European level. Rafael has already mentioned one, this zero land take by 2050, but there are also other ones. And one of the major challenges, how to limit this land take and make and contribute to this sustainability target. And one of the key strategy is infill development. And as in the talk before, there is no sufficient data on the amount and the spatial distribution of these so-called infill development potentials. And there are many systems already existing on the municipal level, but when you look on the national level, there are no figures available, no data. So that's why in the last years, some irregular standardized questionnaire surveys has been taken out, and they are quite effective in analyzing or getting a national figure on this infill development potentials. But during this research, the Leibniz Institute was involved in that. We have also looked at the possibilities to automatically identify such IDPs based on existing geospatial databases. And I'm referring to a paper, so the things I'm presenting today can be read in this publication. So the outline is, I will just briefly introduce you into the definitions of the IDPs, some related work, then I will shortly present this GIS-based approach. And then I want to talk about the experience we had in piloting and then give some future perspectives. Starting with the concepts. What is infill development potentials? We referred like as a theoretical potential, regardless of the market availability or the concrete intentions of use. And we have three types: the brownfields as abundant areas, the vacant lots, and then the underutilized lots. And at first, of course, we had a look at some related work. There are some. It is still quite a niche in the applied GI science and remote sensing community, and there are only a few studies available for the automatic detection of brownfields using remote sensing data, but also on identifying vacant lots and underutilized lots. They mainly make use of existing cadastral and topographic databases from national and cadastral agencies. Here, what's the state of kind of art? I needed to update this, and most of the approaches that work on high resolution satellite images, object-based image classification took place, and there are different also approaches or even data. So one has using hyperspectral data, so they were able to even identify different materials and then infer from the material to a specific older building or maybe abandoned building. And the last one here from Xu and Elas, they were using thermal imagery to identify unused buildings or not heated buildings. So this is a quite new work, but nevertheless, in general, we can say these remote sensing approaches are mostly not operational because they don't have accessibility to the data, or they are very costly, and they only provide like a candidate brownfields that could be the beginning of an inventory process. I think that's the same thing Rafael said in the talk before. Having a look at the I call it GIS-based techniques. What I mean here, here we make use of vector-based data, cadastral data, and there's a couple of already operationalized applications that are used in Germany on a municipal level. But these GIS-based approaches they seem to us more promising in the respect of a nationwide implementation. So we focused in this project mainly on the automatic identification of vacant lots and underutilized lots. Yeah, I will now come to the approach for the automatic identification. That possible data sources which can be used, but the data requirements are really strong or high. So they need to be nationwide available. They need to be homogenized, and they need to be accessible data, and this should be updated regularly. And there's only a few data that fulfill these requirements. There's one, the digital landscape model. It's called the Authoritative Topographic Cartographic Information System. And then we have a nationwide data set. It's called official building footprints or building polygons and the corresponding coordinates. And of course, there's also a cadastral information system, which is called ALKIS. Which is in the last years, it is available for some states. They have open data access, and but during this time we did this study, they were not accessible at all. So what kind of data we were using? Here's the digital landscape model, where you see the different building or the blocks, the transport network, and the land use. And then we have the building polygons and then the house coordinates. And what we are looking for is to identify the vacant lot and the underutilized areas. And the methodology is basically, it's 3 steps. It's first, we were looking for unbuilt areas within this existing settlement bodies. Here we focus only on residential, mixed, and industrial commercial usage. And then we do a constraint-based exclusion of all areas which are not suitable for an infill development. And then the last step, we characterize and classify the detected areas or infill development potential candidates into vacant lots and underutilized lots. The procedure looks like this. We have the digital landscape model, the building data, and in the first step, we extract exclusion layers. So in the first left, that's actually just the footprints. Yeah. So when you have a footprint or a building, you cannot develop something. And then we apply rules, clearance areas according to the clearance guidelines of the official building regulations to the buildings. And we come up with this layer, the second layer, and the last one is the transport network. When we merge all together, we have these red areas here, but as you can see, they are not really nice. There are still some linear linear structures which are not suitable. So we apply kind of a simple image processing technique, eliminate them and just keep the blue ones. And then we classify them also with a very simple rule. So we said when the area has access to a road, it is most probably a vacant lot. And when it is it does not have a direct access, then it is counted as underutilized areas. Yeah, then we have the results and we store them in the database. The red ones are the vacant lots, the blue ones are the underutilized sites. Yeah, we can then characterize them. So we can calculate different features to them, like area, form size, and you can then look or use this database for exploring things. And this also allows them to make some spatial analysis and to create density maps. Maybe here all vacant lots are selected, and then a density map is calculated by just showing where are many vacant lots with a size of more than 500 square meter. So this is kind of also a tool for getting a rough idea where could be an area with many vacant lots. So as I said, this research was done parallel to a survey, and we had also case studies which were part of this survey. So we did interviews within the cities and the municipalities, and we created thematic maps from this automated method, and we confronted the stakeholders with them. The aim of these maps were to stimulate the discussion process in the interview, then to validate the approaches. First, the approach of the survey, and also the approach of the GIS-based estimation, and then discuss opportunities for model improvement. So what was the reason? Why did we falsely detect this area? And here you can see this thematic map. We use this kind of representation where the infill development potentials were represented as such proportional area symbols. So this is kind of a more or less fuzzy representation. And then the stakeholders, they got the maps, and they then marked directly in the map the false positives or the errors the automated method has produced. Yeah, so from these case studies, we get some insights also, and we could qualitatively assess our method. And what we turned out is that we have a quite high error of commission. So we have lots of false positive candidates, which would lead to an overestimation if you just look at the sum up values of square meters. The identified infill development potentials, they are on average 3 times higher than from the survey. And we identified different types of errors which were present, and we also quantified it, how often an error or a reason was, how often an error was based on a reason. Yeah. So this figure shows the different categories of errors, and most of the time it was just the missing lot boundary, which we didn't have, and then the missing detail in the land use description. So as you see, 40% was the errors. They were a result of a missing lot boundary, and 30, and here this 18%, the gray and the yellow one, were because there were public pocket parks which were not modeled in the digital landscape model, and this is just the reason. That's why, because also the results of the pilot application, they were appreciated by the local experts as a kind of a discussion basis, but the overestimations based to these false positives, they were not acceptable from the practical perspective. So we therefore demonstrated what will happen when we have access to the cadastral data system, and we also developed a method and compared the results with the data from the topographic database. And here you see the differences. The green ones, these were the detected from the ATKIS, the method I have explained. And when you have the lots in terms of the geometry and the footprints, it's of course more easier to detect them. And yeah, this is just also, we wanted to demonstrate that it is quite easy when you have access. But of course, for our aim, and the aim was finding a method for a nationwide application, it is not, or was not, useful. Yeah, come to a conclusion. Yeah, we have shown a way to automatically identify these infill development candidates. We also have lots of overestimations due to missing information, because when we don't have the parcel geometry, it's quite tricky. And the validation by local expert knowledge is necessarily needed. We could show that using cadastral information system in combination with additional data is more reliable, but currently is still not nationwide available, but it will be in the future. But this approach offers the opportunity to support cities and municipalities for the first inventory and land use management. And the method have already been applied in states. So in Saxony, Anhalt, this method have been implemented. And yeah, this method can also be kind of a companion method for quality control and outlier detection to the standardized questionnaire survey. So when you have very high values from the survey and they do not correspond to the values you got from this automatic detection, you could highlight this case and have a look at the data. Maybe there was an error in the data. Yeah, and the pros of this method is the high objectivity and comparability. Even if you cannot produce good absolute numbers, it's good to show spatial patterns and relative differences in Germany. And as an outlook, yeah, this inventory will gain more importance in the future. These open data initiatives, they will make cadastral data freely available in the near future. So there are already 7 states in Germany, they have open data, and you have access to the cadastral system. And we need to use additional data, such as OpenStreetMap information, also trying this thermal remote sensing information, social media data, because you can actually track human activity in space on a very high resolution level. Also look at consumption data. And what is also possible, or is our aim, is to enrich this areas or these candidates with attributes describing the quality, like the green space availability in this neighborhood, or the accessibility to public services. So this could also be a good information for evaluating different options of development. Yeah, and of course, it would be nice if we could produce like an easy to use tool for municipality and testing it in other cities and regions in the world with comparable data. And yeah, that's all from my side, and here are some references, and looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Robert, for that interesting presentation as well. What I took away from it is that the strength of objectivity is present, and also the use of existing national data to create a wide potential map of sites. I was wondering if there was perhaps any experience with the subjectivity of local politics, or maybe even of local users. In Germany, the name NIMBY is also thrown around a lot, meaning not in my backyard. Is there any way to tie in those aspects of society into this tool or other tools, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, this subject, these preferences, local preferences, could be modeled in a different layer, and I see this to set up a database that describes the areas in an objective way, where you can select these areas. It's more than it's better when you have this subjective level on the user side, so that you can have a system where you can select your own preferences, or like defining rules to select your minimum size of areas. So I think it is then possible to also consider this subjectivity on a regional level.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And maybe some aspects of resilience, which will also be a focus of the American presentations, as I understand it, could also perhaps flow in. Maybe that's a possible extension to this already wonderful tool that already provides a wonderful basis, of course, nationally. With that, I'd like to give the opportunity for quick questions from our audience. Now would be your opportunity. And if that is not the case, or sorry, yeah, Rafael.
Yeah, I think I definitely afterwards, if he's interested, Mr. Hecht, let's have a talk about the systems. Because I know you have also participated in the just recently launched BBSR study, and because that was one of my questions I asked to the BBSR. Guys, what you have, what is the base of your data? Is it just a survey, or is there any background data? And they told me, no, it is just a survey. And probably there is an interconnection of what we are doing, because like I find it very interesting that you're working on something similar. Where I'm talking to politicians, they're not, somehow seem to be not interested, but here there's something going on where you are interested. So let's please try to get somehow connected. And yeah, I would be interested. So I'm open for discussion if you like.
Yeah, thank you. Will do.
Wonderful. And with that, I would like to give the floor to our American colleagues as well. Thank you very much for the presentations.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to just turn it over directly to Dr. Lauren Heberle, who will be kicking off the presentations today. Thank you.
Sure. And you guys have the slides. Awesome. I'll just let you know what the next slide should be.
Perfect. I'll set it up right now.
So thanks so much for inviting us to talk about the Brownfields Area Benefits Estimator Toolkit. I think that this is a really interesting pairing of efforts. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the purpose and the components of the toolkit that we've developed, and then I'll hand it over to our Assistant Director of Advanced Planning, Director of our Brownfields program, Dr. Alison Smith, and our Louisville Metro Councilwoman, Nicole George, for their conversation about how they are beginning to use it. But first, relevant to the previous presentations, is I want to remind folks that there are differences in how brownfields are defined in U.S. policy and programs. And, you know, as you're well aware, these definitions vary dramatically across jurisdictions. And so what I'm hearing in your conversations here about AI and scraping and this goal to have this national database to increase infill is primary. Whereas in the U.S., our brownfields policies are more centered. I mean, that's part of it, but we enter into the conversation around the perceived contamination or the potential contaminant, real or perceived contamination that is the barriers to having developers and others take on the property because of the questions around liability. And so that's how a lot of our conversation, I want to remind folks of that. And I think that's really crucial because as a driver in our programs across the U.S. And is an entry point for community engagement into developing ongoing inventories at local levels. So there is a difference in the goal here, but I do think that they can inform each other. As you've seen, a national AI scraping leads to a lot of errors and is a start to the conversation for further local input and local examination, whereas we are starting from a local area and building out a local knowledge and building up. So next slide. So the EPA, US EPA Brownfields program funded us a few years ago. And through this funding, we created this, the Brownfields Area Benefit Estimator Toolkit, or as we finally call it, the BABE, to empower communities to examine how current residents might benefit from cleanup and redevelopment and provide those communities with some resources to inform further discussion and action. So many of the resources and that are out there for brownfields redevelopment really privilege the return on investment for developers. So the question has been, how do we get developers to get over their fear of redeveloping potentially contaminated property, right? What is the public sector? The conversations has been about where and when should the public sector be supporting that and helping to fund that? And our earliest conversations around that were based on the assessment process and funding assessment. So you remove the uncertainty about what the contamination is. The developer can then have some certainty and build the cost of cleanup and all of that into the reuse, right? And so that led to having a very market-driven redevelopment process across the country. And so there was never a systematic, there was also never, only until recently, not a systematic examination of whether the existing residents in those areas would end up benefiting from the reuse, right? And so the BABE consists of two component apps. One is the Brownfield Tracker, which is our mobile app for building a brownfield inventory from the ground up, or updating an existing inventory, and a desktop app that helps users explore the projected community changes that result from the cleanup and redevelopment. So in addition to that, we have a guidebook that takes the reader into the full background of the project and the logic and reasoning for the focus on community benefits, and the structure of the BAT and the tracker. There are several story maps and documents from our demonstration projects that are also available for folks to explore and play around with. So next slide. So our intended users, there's been some discussion in your efforts to create these national tools that could then be used at the local level, and that there's going to be a need for you all to develop that interface that's easily accessible, that's not so technically unavailable. For this, there's still a level of that, right? That removal, but we see that the tracker and the benefits analysis tool would have similar audiences, but with perhaps different project leads or users. They're intended for individuals and groups who work in the brownfield redevelopment area at the neighborhood and area level, and these tools, by centering community, not the developer or the city itself as the point of inquiry, is a really important piece of who users might be. So we can see neighborhood associations perhaps being involved as a lead depending on their capacity, or a city agency working with a neighborhood association in order to begin these conversations. It always centers to whom do the benefits accrue, and provides, and we think that this will provide a platform to engage those most impacted in identifying and prioritizing the properties of concern for inclusion in a brownfield inventory. So the folks who live in the neighborhood this is a pathway for them to engage in how the city might prioritize marketing these sites to, or providing assessments for public money for the redevelopment or cleanup of these sites. And so they can use this to explore different scenarios. Slide 4, please. So the tracker is, it's a survey instrument. It's an observation tool. We use Esri's Survey 123 platform for real-time on-the-ground data collection of community brownfield conditions. So this tool is intended for use by the city officials, environmental professionals, other community-based organizations. I think that's really a really important audience for it, in their efforts to collect information about local properties in a way that engages neighborhood residents, advocates, and researchers and other stakeholders in learning about and monitoring ongoing environmental conditions in their neighborhoods. So it's a tool to build and or update inventories in a systematic framework. We know that you've gone one slide too far, or you've skipped some slides there.
Sorry about that. Seems like somebody else took over control. I'll go back a few slides.
Yeah, keep on going.
Is that
back.
correct? One more?
No, yeah, keep going. That's good enough. That's all right. You can stop there if you want.
Thank you.
So we know that land use and changes to neighborhoods happen fast, right? It's constantly shifting. We know that we can have local folks doing bad things on these properties, local, illegal dumping, or there might be a fire, or there might be something that happens in real time that matters. So we think that this tool can be used to be able to collect this local observational data related to environmental hazards, and help the folks who are making decisions about how to prioritize it, keep accurate records of them. Community organizations and municipalities really do need dynamic property condition inventories, and we think that we argue that using this kind of tracker, this kind of mobile app, deploying it at a local level, helps folks do that. It promotes a bottom-up approach to planning and development, and is an additional tool to seeking to address environmental injustices that are perpetuated in other environmental cleanup and redevelopment practices. So actually, that previous slide has if you could look at just really quick on slide 4, there is, you can take a look at you can test drive it if you'd like. I will give you access to it, but it's also a link to that is in the chat, is part of the chat. So you can take a look at the questions that we have. So back to slide 5, please. So the tracker does require a project lead, and once a plan for collecting the observational data is established, then folks can start using the app. Users are guided through a series of questions about the site they are reviewing, and these questions are things that most U.S. environmental consultants would do in the early site review. So during a phase 1 inventory development, or an assessment, or for a city's assessment grant, for instance. Importantly, we have there's an online field guide that's linked in there that brings folks to pictures of what each of these conditions might look like, and some other information about why they might be an important piece of the site condition and to remark on. And it also allows the users to take photos of what they're seeing and have those photos geocoded and connected to the site observation. So the next slide. The individual or users who serve as project lead then have immediate access to the data collected. They can choose to make it available to the public so that they can see their data collection process. And so this is very important in communities who have felt completely disempowered or in that process, to kind of see what the progress of their efforts are. You know, how fast can they get this information? They can also serves as a way to double check the information and correct it down the road. So then once you've got this this slide, so the next slide. This also, the Survey 123 data analysis, it's a really handy little tool, not quite there yet. Yeah, is very handy in terms of being able to have discussions about how we might prioritize those, bring this data back and make it available with the different kinds of things you're seeing on the sites. So it has all of that available to the lead for all the variables that we collect, that would be collected. Okay, next slide. So once you have decided what's going to go into your inventory, what you're going to actually include or not, you can then load that up into the benefits analysis tool. So I'll talk about that a little bit. And you can take a look at this desktop tool at brownfieldbenefits.com. At another point in time, I can do a detailed walkthrough. I don't have time to do that today. But you can either, these tools can be used together or separately. You could load up another inventory that you have, or another database that you have that already exists into the benefits analysis tool, or you can load up what you've collected using the Brownfields tracker. Either way, it's you can also draw your own brownfields on this tool and play around with it to see how it plays out. So imagine you've got your inventory, you want to have your discussions about what will happen if a specific contaminated property is cleaned up and redeveloped, and what impacts and benefits current residents might experience. So this is kind of similar to where you guys were talking about layering on other demographic information around the sites that you've looked at, right? But in this one, the tool asks the user to input specific project information in a guided framework, and based on those inputs, the tool produces an analysis of the user's selected area using data from national sources and user-entered local data, such as the inventory that we talked about that we've built, right? And it provides the user with a report in a PDF format that then includes the area profile of pre-development and the projections for post-development changes in a table form with a narrative guide to help interpret the data, and a few select maps that help spatially visualize, so they can spatially visualize them. And they can take that PDF with them wherever they want, right? And make the case to decision makers about a particular type of reuse or a location for reuse. It's again a conversation starter. Okay, so the next one. Next slide. I'd like to highlight two unique features of that. The users get to define the area of interest for themselves. They can draw it themselves, that area themselves, or they can upload their own shapefile with the boundaries of, say, an official neighborhood or area. This analysis is then based on U.S. Census data that are interpolated to the area drawn by the user. So, of course, that can lead to some issues or areas if the area is too strong, too small, right? But generally, it's for neighborhood size areas, right? Or corridors or what have you. The analysis also identifies the existing residents who would experience the benefits and changes brought by the redevelopment. So this helps the user better visualize and understand who the benefits are going to accrue to if you're going to fix this property up, if you're going to clean it up, if you're going to bring, remove the contaminants and make it safer. And so once all of this is loaded, you load up your brownfields, you load up the area neighborhood parks, you load up the grocery stores in the area that exist in the area, for instance, and then you get to see it all pretty easily. Next slide. The user's going to be can examine 4 different reuse types. Now, every site is different. Every development project has its own unique features, so it's impossible to have a national, comprehensive reuse database. So we see this as the building of some. We chose 4 basic reuse types. There are others that I'd like to include down the road. But where the research sits and what we were able to use projections for were parks, food sources, residential, or retail that's non-food related. And so each of those images that you're seeing there are the data entry fields for each reuse type. And so then once that's in there, then the background ka-chunks and calculates neighborhood changes associated with each type. You can use the tool without specific information and play around with it, or different types of information, different project sizes, different costs, estimates, things like that. You can play around with all of that, but of course, the better the data, the better the output, right? Slide 11, please. The next slide, please. So when the user runs the site analysis, they'll see text appear below, and that's where they'll be able to, in that red box down there is where where you'll click on the report. So in this case, there were two reports created, one for a grocery store on the east side of that neighborhood and one on the west side of the neighborhood. And when you click on that, it opens up a PDF in the new window. And there's a link to a sample PDF that I have in the chat for you to take a look at if you want to. So next slide. These are pictures of what from two different reports for the two different sites. If each of these sites were to be redeveloped for fresh food, so it's what the user would get, and you'd see on the, so for instance on the bottom side, of course, if the site on the east side was developed as a grocery store, you'd be completely remedying the low access to fresh food that neighborhood experiences by putting it there, as opposed to over on the other side where that's in proximity of that Kroger, the blue dot, the Kroger store. And so this may seem like folks know this intuitively, but having the picture and then having the table of the number of residents plus the demographics of the residents attached to that, and is where they can see that, especially in the US, where we've got a huge amount of racial discrimination and historic disinvestment in a lot of neighborhoods. This allows folks to start beginning to see how doing this can really concretely address that issue. So next slide. Again, of course, because the return on investment is also often talked about in terms of property tax revenue increases at the local level. When you read about in local politics, local government in the US, we also wanted to be able to project a property tax revenue projection that takes into account the fact that, yes, that property value for that property will increase. It also does have an increase pressure on the value of the parcels around it, and yet that can be dampened by the other brownfields in the area that go unredeveloped, right? So we have it's a pretty crass formula, but it tries to take into account that continued and ongoing issue of the other brownfields that may not be redeveloped yet. So it is a tool to also, draw folks' attention to the fact that folks should have an area-wide plan, and pay attention to the other brownfields in that area as well, and not just site by site. It also lets the neighborhood know what exactly that revenue is being generated by their neighborhood, right, in that area. And I think that's a tool that a lot of neighborhoods in the US don't really understand in terms of local politics. They think about it as a citywide effort, right? And so finally, the other important piece about this is when property tax revenue goes up, property values go up. We also have a problem with affordability and people being priced out of the homes that they're currently living in. And so we have another next slide component of this called the risk of displacement, where we show the users the percentage of renters in the area that would be severely cost burdened at two different levels, 30% spending 30% of their income on rent or more, or okay, 50%, and how many, it's a projection of how many more folks would be thrown, of existing residents would be thrown into that category based on this. So in the US, that Brownfields conversation has only just now been taking hold and talking about having policies in place to protect residents who would be negatively impacted by increases in property values. So I think the next slide is so that's just the cover of the report of what the output ends up looking like for folks to use. They can run it as many times as they want. And then the next slide is just the slide of all the folks who've been working with us over time. And I can turn it over to Dr. Alison Smith and Councilwoman Nicole George, who I've been working with on these.
Thank you, Dr. Heberle. If we can go to the next slide, please. So as was mentioned, I am Dr. Alison Smith. I am the Assistant Director of the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability for Louisville Metro Government in Kentucky. And in one of my capacities, I oversee the Brownfields program. Even before that, I worked with Dr. Heberle at the Center for Environmental Policy and Management. So I've been doing community engagement around brownfields for almost a decade. In our 2020 assessment grant application to the EPA, we discussed the BABE tool and how it could be used to engage with residents in the corridor that we were focusing on. It was actually the neighborhood that Dr. Heberle showed in her examples. It's an area where we have majority of brownfield sites are located, has a history of redlining and other housing discrimination and everything that comes with that. Economic disinvestment, incompatible uses, exposure to toxics in both soil and air, and lack of green spaces. Now, as probably everyone on this call knows, it has been difficult to engage people around brownfields unless there's a specific site of concern. Add on to that, this grant started during COVID, so engagement was always going to be a challenge for us. Because we weren't able to have a traditional Brownfields 101 workshop where we have interactive activities, group discussions, even tours of the area, we had to rely on technology more than usual. Of course, we've all learned how powerful it can be to provide virtual access to meetings for people who wouldn't normally be able to attend, but nothing beats a one-on-one engagement, having a one-on-one conversation with people. So we use the BABE inventory tool not only to collect accounts of where brownfields are and the conditions that are observed, but as a way to give the community a tool to learn about how to identify potential contaminated sites. As you go through the inventory questions, as Dr. Heberle shows, you realize that tanks on the side or staining on the concrete are pretty good indicators that there's a cause for concern. We were able to hold a virtual meeting with the neighborhood to introduce the grant, the partners, and the BABE tool, and then followed it up with an in-person meeting at one of our catalyst sites. Now we did meet outdoors, we provided masks and hand sanitizer. We still did not get a huge turnout. This was in a bit of a lull, but a resurgence in COVID was just starting, and many residents were just uncomfortable meeting in person, even in an outdoor space. But because we had a smaller turnout, we were able to have some really in-depth conversations with people who did show up. Our plan was to follow up that meeting with a walking or driving tour later in the summer or early fall. That would allow us to be right next to people as they're using the tool, to walk through step by step and kind of be able to get to know the neighborhood better. Unfortunately, COVID cases began to resurge and no one was comfortable meeting in person. And that's really critical to make sure people get hands-on experience with the tool out in the field. So as I prepare for my next assessment grant application, I'll be using the BABE tool to continue to build an inventory of potential sites in this area, which we're calling the 30th Street corridor, as well as on the Preston corridor. Next slide, please. Preston Highway in Louisville reaches from the riverfront in the north of the county to the far south border of the county. It goes all the way across from north to south. It's one of our busiest corridors with a wide range of uses, from exclusively residential to scattered commercial, including many immigrant-run businesses, to industrial areas. So my office, Advanced Planning and Sustainability, also does neighborhood and corridor planning. Our planning team had undertaken a study of the Preston corridor to understand how it could be improved, made safer for cars and pedestrians, and accommodate better transit, such as bus rapid transit. So I suggested getting an inventory of brownfields could be a part of this process, and would it help engage people to identify underutilized sites that could potentially catalyze redevelopment in the area. Once Councilwoman George learned of the tool, we had a champion. She is one of 26 Louisville Metro Council members. Her district is in kind of the southwestern portion of Louisville. And I'll let her tell you about the interactions with constituents and the Prosper Preston Business Alliance, where we were able to deploy this tool.
Hello, I'm Nicole George, and as Dr. Smith said, I'm a council member with Louisville, and I serve a section of the Preston corridor where the BABE tool was used. On the front end, let me say that this politician is very much interested in brownfields and infill opportunities, because ultimately who is hurt by underdeveloped spaces, and that's the community and those neighbors that are closest to those sites. So I'm very much interested, and also want to give real credit to Metro's Office of Advanced Planning. Dr. Smith has done a really excellent job of engaging council members on opportunities and helping educate on the process. And so I'm here today because I want to say on the front end of this tool has really allowed for significant community engagement, and to never underestimate the power of giving community members something to do. I heard the need for validation of local experts, and that's exactly what this tool had the opportunities for. And I'm here to share just 5 basic lessons learned from that experience. The first benefit that we saw in the community was that the tool allowed for expanded knowledge and learning. We learned what constituted a brownfield and what specifically to look for within those sites. And that was really important, as community members have a lot of concern, but oftentimes, having that focus can be really difficult. Next, it offered the opportunity to connect neighbors, neighbors who are like-minded, that are community invested, and want to have a positive impact. It also allowed those neighbors to connect with Metro's Office of Advanced Planning and Dr. Smith's work and the work of U of L. And so being able to have those points of connection within the community, as well as within our agencies and university, is really important. The third benefit that we saw was, again, just more to the point of focus. As the work Dr. Smith referred to, we have a group called Prosper Preston that was really very catalytic in inspiring the overall corridor plan for Preston. And as part of that, they look at everything from land use, they look at mobility, transit, branding, corridor identity. And so it's easy to really get overwhelmed when you have a corridor with lots of need. And so again, being able to have a specific process and engagement strategy to just look at brownfields and its connection with the vacant spaces that we see along the corridor was really important. It was also really important in the way of building confidence amongst neighbors. The tool was incredibly user-friendly and used common language. And so having both common language and a common standardized way to assess that could be easily communicated out into the community really did build that confidence and help neighbors get engaged. Number 4, in terms of focus, we really saw the potential for community members to look at these sites with fresh eyes. It's sometimes easy to just get accustomed to what's not right in our communities and what we're most familiar with. You can get accustomed to a brownfield that you drive past every day and not really recognize or give that the focus that it needs. And again, this tool allowed us to slow down and really give focus, and also to ask questions and set priorities. And last but not least, the process really did help us elevate need around infill opportunities and underdeveloped sites, and raise awareness both broadly in the community, but then also amongst the project and particularly with the idea of being able to inform the plan. I'm convinced we're going to have a better corridor plan as part of this work. And again, I'm really grateful to the work of University of Louisville and Metro's advanced planning. Thank you.
Here's our contact information. We are happy to answer any questions you may have. Again, we plan to re-engage this summer to use that inventory tool to develop a site. So fingers crossed for the next assessment grant.
And for those of you lucky enough to come to the Brownfields conference, I think all of, well, I don't know if Council Member George is going to be able to make it. I hope so, but I know that our researchers will be there too. And looks like we have questions, so I'll mute and direct the, I'm not sure who was first. Carl, did you see?
I did not know. It's a free-for-all now.
Okay. We're getting to dessert now.
All right, I see the Brownfield community has is funny in finding names, so the BAPE name is also quite interesting. Nevertheless, I also found it quite interesting. So the question is the slides are shared because like the ideas which are spread here this evening is quite interesting also to find like what you can use also in our system and if this is okay for you, but yeah, good ideas. So I'm really interested in the slides.
No problem.
So I think we put the links in the chat, and of course, if you go to the University of Louisville Brownfields page, you'll see all of those as well as some training slides. You know, this was based in the U.S. system, so there's probably going to need to be some, you know, coordination on how that might apply. But I bet these researchers would be happy to work on that project with you. Sorry, next question, please. Robert?
Yes, thanks very much. I think it's a really nice platform. And do you think this data could be made openly available, at least for scientific reasons? I think the relation is very important to understand the benefits, let it be socially, economically, or ecological. And then the transformation process that took place in terms of the land use, also maybe the extension of the buildings. Would it be possible to reuse your data? I mean, in a kind of also anonymous
way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the tool itself, the Survey 123, the framework is hosted by the person who uses it. So we provide the template, and then so the data are going to be you know, they're going to be owned by whoever is using it. You know, we don't have we don't have the capacity or resources to host a national database of inventories in that way, for using the tracker at least, right? So we've got capacity to help folks who come to us and ask, and we'll figure it out. But having a national, you know, place that works like that is not, you know, it wouldn't be possible. And I don't think it'd be useful either in the end, because I think that these surveys is really about making sure folks are engaging with their communities in the way that they need to be engaged with it. There's so much variation, even across Louisville, you know, within our little city, about how that should work or could work. And who has power to own that data is a whole other thing. Now, for the desktop, when folks upload their database and then save it as a project with a project link, I do have access to that. I will have access to that. Now, I haven't fully explored what that will look like and whether or not that data is really, you know, what the accuracy of that might be. That wasn't really part of the plan in the end. It really is meant for local use. It's not, and the national pieces of it are for informing a baseline where they could, for instance, add a layer of sites. You can, the tool allows you to do that, and then you can go in and draw your sites and you know, identify them and save that as a project link. And so there is a need for, there is a need for a starting point for some communities, maybe to, you know, who haven't necessarily, don't have an inventory to start from. I'll be in conversation with the state of Kentucky later today, as a matter of fact, about helping a state, you know, seeing what the state might make, how the state might make use of this kind of tool. So I'm open to lots of different conversations because I am a sociologist. I am not a geographer, and I am not a GIS technician at all. I know enough to ask dangerous questions. And so it's I don't know if that answers your question, but I do see the, you know, eventually I could see this very easily integrating into a different framework, right? And being housed somewhere where that could, these inventories could be, you know, easily collected or combined and start building that. But again, these inventories are dynamic and they need to be, they change sometimes on a daily basis, right? So you have to have the folks who are collecting these inventories, you know, the way I talk about it is write it into your 5-year, you know, land use planning process where you go, or neighborhood planning process where you go and have folks revisit specific properties to check on the condition of it, you know, have a plan in place for updating this data set. I just had the experience today of somebody calling me and asking me what's going on the Blackleaf site. I just saw, you know, something big giant building there. What is that? That's in our backyard, you know. And I hadn't been, you know, I needed to call somebody, my friend, and find out what was going on there, right? So moving from the question of national to local is a really tough conversation to have, and what goals you're setting for how we're using this technology is such a crucial part of it. Like, I see huge value in everything you guys are doing with the AI stuff. It's so interesting to me, and as conversation starters, right? But not necessarily as the end goal of what ends up happening with the site.
Mm-hmm.
And Nova, I saw you had your hand up. I know we're a little bit over time, but still, we would like to give you the opportunity.
Sure, quickly, just I was very curious to hear from Councilmember George and Alison about your experience with community members using the Brownfields tracker. How easy was it to learn how to use, and how strong do you think the data was that was collected through their use? And thank you for your presentations.
Sure. In both instances where we deployed the tool, I had Dr. Heberle and her colleague, Chris Harrell, who was one of the developers, there to give an overview to community members to answer questions. And when we worked with Councilwoman George and Prosper Preston, they were again there. We walked through it step by step. Everyone could have it downloaded on their phone. We made sure everybody was ready to go. So it is initially kind of an upfront intensive effort to make sure that people get the app, understand how to move through it, have their GPS turned on, understand not to go on private property. But as Councilwoman George said, the interface is very easy to use. So I think doing that type of intro once or twice, having someone there to troubleshoot, can set you up for success, you know, long term. It's that upfront, here it is, here's how you use it. And then beyond that, I think it's very simple to use.
I would agree. I would just maybe describe the experience that we had in the preparation, which was, if memory serves, Dr. Smith, maybe 30 minutes. I can't remember. Again, what I remember from that experience and what I heard from community members was there was tremendous value in just learning about what a brownfield is and what to be looking for. And again, having that tool be a guide for that as a reminder. What I heard from community members was that the tool was relatively intuitive. And so, you know, going through it once or twice really did kind of cement for people how to use it. I would not have described it as intense. I would have described it as, yes, you know, an overview is needed, but certainly doable and something to be planned for.
Thank you. Just seems like such a great community engagement tool and a lot of beneficial data, and really appreciate all of the lessons learned and key points that you pointed out, Councilmember George.
Absolutely. And I will speak for the US EPA in also saying that we might want to have you back again for another presentation for our domestic audience, as we have new communities coming into the Brownfield community of practice every year. And I think this would be great for a new grantee to kind of begin to orient and also set up the conversations that they need to have to be involved in those redevelopment decisions. The sooner the better. And we might also draw on you to talk to other elected members to introduce them to Brownfields as new members too. So I appreciate
We'd be
everybody's.
happy to do that. We'd be
Okay.
happy to do that. Yes.
That would be fabulous. And of course, you know, shameless plug time for the Brownfields Conference in Oklahoma City this August, the 16th to the 19th. Registration is open for those who would like to join us at the U.S. National Brownfields Training Conference. Carl, our colleagues from Germany, thank you for organizing this DSNet. Thank you for sharing your lessons. I think we had some really interesting areas where what we thought were very separate presentations actually really nicely paired with each other. And I think there was really good information exchange. So Carl, if you'd like to take us away.
Okay, gladly. Also from my side, thank you very much. I'll just mention really quick, we will make a recording of this webinar available and distribute it along our channels. It will be available online on the de-us.net website. Further, we'll look to prepare a follow-up email and help the networking and the communication between all the presenters here, if that's so desired. If not, please just contact me really briefly. Finally, one plug for DEUS. The next webinar is on June 9th. We'll talk about community engagement in Leipzig and in the city of Fresno, California. And with that, all that is left is for me to thank you all for your participation and have a nice rest of the day, either early morning or evening, based upon where you are. Thank you, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Bye all.
inviting
Thank
us.
you all. Bye.
And thanks for joining us. Bye. Thanks, Carl. You did a great job.
Yeah, gladly. It was dynamic, but yeah, I trust I was able to fill Uwe's shoes.
Yes, I appreciate that. And we'll talk again soon.